Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel for a brand new mystery with Molly. If you are new around here, if you have never seen my face on your screen before, then hi, my name is Molly and I post true crime videos like this every single week. So if you think that is something that you might want to stick around for, then please do subscribe and don't forget to switch on the little notification bell so that YouTube will let you know whenever I post a new video. I do apologise if my voice sounds a bit deep and gross in this video. I caught that horrible cold that seems to be going around and I'm only just starting to get over it, so if I sound a bit bunged up, that is why. But this week we are going to be talking about the solved case of Melanie Wallner. She was a young woman who was tragically murdered in the mid-2000s, and honestly this is one of the wildest cases I think I've ever researched. The lengths Milani's killer went to try and cover up this crime is just insane, like nothing I've ever heard. Before we get into the case, please listen carefully to the following. This video is about the murder of a young woman and it involves heavy themes such as violence towards women and domestic violence. Viewer discretion is advised. So for this week's case, we are going back more than 13 years now to the summer of 2009 in Cobham, which is a village located in the county of Surrey in England. It was the 9th of June 2009 when a 999 call was made by a frantic woman who was claiming to have just found a dead human body. This woman was the landlady of a house located on a road called Hamilton Avenue in Cobham. She owned this house, I think, with her husband, and they were at the house that day because they were kind of clearing it out and cleaning it up because their previous tenant of the home had moved out, so they were getting it ready for new tenants. And as they were doing this, I think one of the things that they were getting ready to clear was the dustbin, the wheelie bin around by the front of the house. Now the wheelie bin was very full, and according to a few articles, bin men had actually refused to take it because it was so heavy. They couldn't really pick it up, it was that heavy. So the landlord and landlady opened the lid and they peered inside to see what had been left in there by the previous tenants that was so heavy. And when they did this, they actually saw buried under a load of bin bags what they thought was an ankle, a human foot covered in crawling maggots. So very panicked, the landlady picked up the phone and she called 999 reporting what she had found in the wheelie bin.
Sorry, police, what's your emergency?
I found a dead body.
Okay. Whereabouts is it?
It was upstairs. I think I feel a thought in the mother.
Okay, right, okay.
As soon as they received this call, officers were immediately dispatched to the house. They cordoned off the scene, they looked inside the bin, and sure enough, there was a foot. There was a dead body inside of it, which I'm sure detectives would have been able to tell immediately just from the smell of this bin without even having to look inside of it. There was a definite strong smell of decomposition. This body was decomposing quickly. It had been in this bin for a while, and it was June, it was summer, so it was hot outside, which would obviously speed up the decomposition process. The body was that of a woman, and it was obvious just from how she had been found that she had probably been the victim of foul play. Why else would she have been inside this wheelie bin? It seemed like someone had hidden her in there. Her body had been placed inside of a sleeping bag, and underneath that she had a plastic bag wrapped around her head. I believe she was partially nude inside of the sleeping bag. Apparently she was just wearing some underwear, some knickers, and also she had an eye mask on her face. You know, those masks that some people wear across their eyes when they're sleeping. So before this woman's body was taken for a post-mortem, a forensic team was called to the scene so that they could collect as much potential evidence as possible before her body was moved, because of course this evidence could prove incredibly useful later on down the line when police are looking for suspects. But they didn't just search the bin, they also had a look around the entire property for evidence, just in case anything of significance was found inside of the home. And on first glance, they didn't really find much, to be honest. They couldn't identify any areas or rooms in the home where something may have happened, like where a violent struggle had taken place. The house was actually very clean, so maybe if there was some evidence in the home, blood for example, perhaps it had been cleaned up. Meanwhile, as all of this was going on, the detectives' #1 priority was to obviously identify identify this woman, find out who she was and how she ended up in that wheelie bin. Why this wheelie bin too? Did she have some kind of connection to this house on Hamilton Avenue that the bin belonged to? Did the person who put her in the bin have a connection to this house? So police began looking into previous occupants of the house, and they found out that one of the last tenants to have lived there was a 30-year-old woman named Melanie Wallner. Could Milani have been the woman that was inside of the bin? Well, when the pathologist compared Milani's dental records to the victim's teeth during the post-mortem, they were able to confirm that yes, this body was that of Melanie Wallner. But what was absolutely crazy, what absolutely stunned and just confused the police, was the fact that the couple who owned the house, the landlord and landlady, said that Milani hadn't even lived in the house for about 3 years by this point. And the reason for this, they had been told, was because she had died. They were told 3 years ago in 2006 that Milani had passed away as the result of a brain aneurysm. So why is her body only just being found now in the summer of 2009 inside of a wheelie bin if she had died years prior? But before we go any further with this bizarre situation, let me just tell you a little bit more about Melanie Wallner, about her life and who she was. So as I said, Milani was 30 years old at the time of her death. Her father was called Petrus and her mother was called Jayanne. And as I understand it, she was one of 2 children. She had a brother, although I couldn't find his name online, unfortunately. And Milani and her family were originally from South Africa. That's where Milani was born and where she grew up. And she was described by those that knew her as being a very bubbly and friendly woman. She was bright, she was a lot of fun to be around. People said that she was honestly just a bundle of joy. I have a quote here from her father. He said that his daughter was, quote, the most amazing person. She had a very bubbly personality and was full of laughter. Milani lived in South Africa for most of her life, but then in 1996, when she was around 20 years old, she decided to relocate to the UK, to Britain. And I imagine that this must have been pretty scary for Milani, such a huge life change to be moving away from her family. But she wanted to do it for her career. She wanted to work in the catering field, I think in the UK. That was her dream and her passion. So yeah, she moved to Britain. She started working. She firstly got a job within a catering group at the House of Commons, actually. She worked as a waitress there, and she later got a job at a hotel in London. And it was actually while she was in this job when she met the man who would go on to become her husband. His name was Peter Wallner, and he was originally from Germany. They started dating soon after they met. They got on really well. They fell in love, and in 2001 they tied the knot. They got married, and Milani became Melanie Wallner. And after they married, they moved to Cobham in Surrey. They eventually moved into that house on Hamilton Avenue in Cobham, and they got new jobs too. They both started working at the same hotel in Cobham. I think Milani was still doing catering and Peter worked as a chef there. And as far as anyone knew, everything was going well for them. The couple had a good life until, of course, 2006, around late August, early September of 2006, when friends and family of the couple, Milani's family in South Africa, were informed that she had suddenly died of a brain aneurysm. And the person who told them that was Milani's husband, Peter Wallner. But then, as we know, fast forward to 3 years later, in June of 2009, Milani's dead body was discovered in that wheelie bin by hers and Peter's landlords. And Peter was nowhere to be found. When the police searched the house, he wasn't there and his belongings were gone. So then where was he and what did he know about this situation? What the hell had gone on here? If Milani had been dead for 3 years, where had her body been kept all that time? She obviously hadn't been in the wheelie bin for that whole period of time, so where had she been? And did she really just die as the result of a brain aneurysm like Peter had told people, or had something far more sinister happen to her? Well, when the police took a deeper look into this, they actually found that there were absolutely zero official documents to prove that Milani had died of a brain aneurysm. There was no death certificate or anything. There was no proof that Peter's story was true. Apart from the fact that Milani had been dead for 3 years, that part of his story was correct. She had been dead since 2006, and in her post-mortem, the pathologist was able to tell that for those 3 years, Milani had been frozen. Her body wasn't as decomposed as you would expect a human body to be had they been deceased for 3 years, and that's because she had been kept in a freezer for most of that time, at least until shortly before her body was found in the wheelie bin. Now, because she had been dead for years, unfortunately, as I understand it, the pathologist couldn't be 100% certain on her cause of death. However, an injury that Milani had to her face indicated that it wasn't a brain aneurysm that killed her. It was probably a head injury. Just below Milani's left eye on her cheek, she had a very deep puncture wound, as if she had been hit in that area with a heavy object. In fact, she had been hit so hard that it had fractured parts of her skull in that area of her face, and the pathologist said that if she didn't receive immediate medical attention for this type of injury, she would have died. She would have died within like half an hour. So it seemed as though that was her cause of death. Milani had been hit in the head. She had been murdered and then stored in a freezer somewhere. And the top suspect in her murder was quickly identified as being her husband, Peter Wallner, who was still nowhere to be found. Now, as part of their investigation, the police were conducting door-to-door inquiries in and around the area where Peter and Milani lived. I think just to determine whether anyone could have had any information about Milani's death, whether they had seen Peter doing anything suspicious, and also just whether they knew the couple, if they knew what they were like, were they known to argue, etc, etc. So yeah, they were conducting these door-to-door inquiries, and one of the people that they spoke to was the owner of the local shop. The detectives asked him if he knew the couple, and he said yes. He said that he actually knew Peter quite well. He would often come into the shop to buy food and things, although he did say that he hadn't come into the shop. He hadn't seen Peter Wallner for about 2 weeks by this point, and he said that the reason for this was because Peter had said that he was going abroad, I think to visit family. And oddly, before he left, Peter asked the shop owner if he was interested in buying a freezer from him. He had moved out of his home on Hamilton Avenue and he didn't need the freezer anymore, so he was looking to sell it. And the shop owner said, yeah, okay, he agreed to buy the freezer from him. He paid Peter £20 for it. Peter left the country and the shop owner gave the freezer to his brother to use. However, what really alarmed the police when they spoke to this brother was that he said that he hadn't actually been using the freezer because every time he opened it, there was a really strong, foul smell. He said that it literally smelled like rotten meat, like something had previously been rotting in there. And as soon as the police heard this, they immediately thought, that is the freezer. That has to be the freezer that Milani's body had been kept in for those 3 years. So this freezer was collected by the police as potential evidence and it was taken to the forensics lab. Detectives thought that maybe scientists might be able to find some DNA or forensic evidence on or in there that could link back to Milani's murder. And in the meantime, forensic tests were also being carried out on items found inside the house that Peter and Milani used to share. The house that the wheelie bin containing Milani's body was found outside of. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the house for the most part was very, very clean. They didn't really find anything inside of the house, but the team did find something outside in the shed, which was in the garden. They found a mattress in the shed. It had just been left in there, and on this mattress there was this big blue stain. It looked like it was ink or paint or something. Maybe someone had accidentally spilt it on there. But then the detectives started to think, what if this wasn't an accident actually? What if someone had purposefully poured this blue ink or paint on the mattress in order to try and cover up another stain that was underneath, perhaps a blood stain? So the mattress was sent off for testing and scientists cut off the top layer of it for examination. And when they did examine it, they found that blood was in fact underneath this blue staining. This blue ink had indeed been used to cover up blood, and when the blood was tested, it was found to be a match to that of Melanie Wallner, suggesting that this mattress was effectively the crime scene. It seemed as though she had been murdered on this mattress, so maybe she was sleeping when she was attacked and killed. But the mattress wasn't the only thing that they found in the shed that had blood on. They also discovered this piece of plastic in the shed that had red stains on. It was eventually concluded that this plastic had come from the freezer that Peter Wallner had sold. It was a part of the freezer, and when the blood on this plastic was tested, once again, it was found to be a match to Milani's DNA. In addition to that, scientists also found little traces of blood inside the actual freezer, despite the fact that it had been cleaned. And I believe, again, this was Milani's blood, which proved that this was the freezer Milani's body had been kept inside all those years. They had forensic evidence to prove this. But as the police were uncovering all of this evidence, they still had two big questions that they were trying to find the answers to. Why and when? When did Milani's murder actually happen? I mean, we know that it was about 3 years prior to her body being found in 2006, but when exactly? What date did she die? And also, why? As the investigation continued, I think the police were just getting more and more confident that her killer was probably her husband Peter. It had to be, but if that was the case, then why did he do it? What motive did he have for wanting his own wife dead? Well, it seemed as though the answer to that question may have been in Milani's diaries. She kept diaries, and after her body was found and the police got in touch with her family back in South Africa, who I think had most of her belongings, they were able to give these diaries to the police to read. And after reading through them, the police discovered that Milani and Peter's marriage was really on the rocks in the lead up to her death, because Milani had found out that her husband was cheating on her. He was cheating with a woman that worked at the same hotel that he and Milani both worked at, which must have just been so devastating for Milani. So Milani told Peter that she knew about the affair, she knew what he had been doing. Apparently they had an argument about it, and this argument ended in Peter promising to never ever do it again. And Milani believed him. Although she was heartbroken about this, she wanted to be able to trust him because she didn't want to leave him. Despite what he had done, she still wanted to make the marriage work. She wrote in her diary, quote, "I am incredibly in love with my husband. I'm going to fight for this marriage with every bone in my body. I'm not willing to give up. I have enough hope for us both." Milani even decided to quit her job at the hotel, I believe because although they were going to try and make their marriage work, she thought that it would be better for both of them if they had some space and some distance from each other just during the day, and then obviously they would see each other in the evenings after work. However, what Milani, I guess, didn't foresee was that it would now be way easier for Peter to keep cheating without her realising, and I think the affair with this woman at his work just resumed once Milani was gone. But maybe Milani found out about it again around the time of her death. Maybe she found out that her husband was still cheating. She confronted him again, they argued, and this argument ended in him killing Milani. Or perhaps she didn't find out. Maybe he just decided that he didn't want to be with Milani anymore. She was getting in the way of his relationships and his affairs with other women, and so instead of breaking up with her, he decided to murder her so that she was out of the picture. But the question of when still remained. When was Milani killed? In an attempt to find out, the police started trying to work out her last steps, her last movements. When was she last seen alive? So her family were asked when they last saw Milani, and they said that it was on the 27th of August 2006. They were with Milani that evening, and they actually had dinner with her. They ordered some Chinese food, which Milani had used her checkbook to pay for, and the police had the evidence of this check. And after that, they never saw or heard from Milani again, because I believe it was just a few days later, in early September of 2006, when her family were told by her husband Peter Wallner that she had suddenly passed away due to a brain aneurysm, which, as we know now, was a lie. That wasn't her cause of death. Now, when Milani's body was found just under 3 years later, in June of 2009, the pathologist examined the contents of her stomach to establish whether she still had any undigested food in there when she died, and she did. They analysed the food in her stomach and concluded that it was the remnants of a Chinese takeaway. So because of of this evidence and the account from her family, the police believed that Milani had most likely been killed just hours after that Chinese meal on the night of the 27th of August 2006. And the hunt was still on for her suspected killer, for Peter Wallner. The police needed to find him, and fast. However, it appeared as though he had fled. He'd left the country. Neighbours of his who lived on Hamilton Avenue informed the police that when he moved out of the house, they'd seen him loading his belongings into a van which he had rented from a van hire business. Some of his neighbours had actually helped him to put his things into the van, and then when everything was packed up, he left, and that was the last that they saw of him. But because he had rented the van, the police were able to get the license plate of the vehicle, which they could use to try and trace Peter's movements after he drove away from the house, where he went after that. And he was spotted on an automatic number plate recognition camera at the port of Dover about 2 weeks before Milani's body was found in the wheelie bin. Just as a side note, one neighbour of Peter's actually told the police that Peter had asked them to put his bin out by the front of the house when it was bin day, and he did. This neighbour put the bin out completely unaware of what was inside of it, who was inside of it, completely unaware that it was Milani's dead body. But going back to what I was saying, the van was spotted at the port of Dover about a fortnight before Milani's body was discovered by the landlords of the house, but where Peter Wallner went from there, the police had no clue. So in an attempt to find out, the police decided to turn to the media and the public for help. They put out a media appeal, an international media appeal, I believe, saying that they were looking for a man named Peter Wallner because they needed to speak to him in relation to the death of his wife. They were obviously hoping that if people saw his face, they could be on the lookout for him, and then if someone did see him, they could contact the police and let them know his location. But in a shocking turn of events, it wouldn't be just a random member of the public who would come forward with Peter Wallner's location. It was actually Peter Wallner himself who got in touch with the police. He literally rang 999 and said that he had just seen the news about the body being found in the wheelie bin in Cobham, and that he was completely shocked and that he needed to speak to the police. And it turns out that at the time of this phone call, he was with his girlfriend in Malta. That's where he went after he left England. So I think from here, he was put in touch with the detectives working on Milani's case. They spoke with him and they were able to convince him to fly back to England so that they could speak to him properly and interview him and everything. And literally as soon as the plane landed at the airport, detectives went straight onto it and they arrested Peter Wallner then and there on suspicion of the murder of his own wife. Following his arrest, he was taken to the police station where he was questioned on the 11th of June 2009. And I imagine the detectives were very keen to hear what he had to say, since he effectively kind of handed himself in. So they sat down with him, the interview began, and incredibly, he didn't deny it. He admitted that yes, he was responsible for his wife Milani's death. However, he claimed that it wasn't murder. He said that he actually killed Milani in self-defense. And I'm going to try and include some of the clips from Peter Wallner's interview in this video as I'm talking through his account. So he said that on the evening that Milani died, the 27th of August 2006, he and Milani had been arguing, mainly about rather small things. So like they were arguing because Peter hadn't been cleaning up in the house when he'd made a mess, not giving Milani the TV remote, stuff like that. But the argument didn't really die down like arguments usually do. It just kept going and going and going. They kept shouting at each other. Peter said that Milani kept getting in his face, and so he pushed her and started walking away. And he claimed that this made Milani angry, and so as he was walking away from her, she hit him on the shoulder with a rolling pin, and so he hit her back. I think he might have punched her or something, and he said that when he did, she fell over and banged her head, but she still managed to get up. And Peter said that moments later, he just suddenly felt some pain in one of his legs, and so he looked down and he saw blood and 3 holes in his jeans from where Milani had just stabbed him 3 times in the leg with a knife. He said that following this, he punched her in the face face, and apparently he actually giggled after he said this in his interview. He laughed about having punched her in the face. He said that after this, Milani grabbed this big cast iron griddle pan from the kitchen. She started kind of swinging it towards him, trying to hit him with it, but he said that he was able to wrestle it off of her, and then he whacked her in the head with it. He hit her in the head with this extremely heavy iron pan 3 times, and as a result of this, Milani died.
It was one of these little arguments that started with me being a bum and not cleaning up after myself, and then snagging the remote and not giving it back. Because it was really in my face, pointing her finger, and you can't do this, and I just sort of pushed it away and was done arguing, and don't you fucking walk away. And then I got clipped on the shoulder with the rolling pin. So if I got it, I'll use you. I got it right here, but not particularly, not hard, I mean, it didn't break any bones or anything. But I did turn around like, what the? I can only remember looking down, having 3 holes in my jeans, with sort of a bit of blood coming down, and her standing there with a knife in her hand going, see? I'm not afraid of you. I even spoke about being afraid of someone. What are you on about? My flat out reaction was to punch her in the face. And it was fair and square. And I'm not talking a hold back or something. It's talking a punch in the face because you just stabbed me. One of those big cast iron Le Creuset griddle pans, proper heavy. If you're smaller, I don't know, at work, if you're smaller apprentice as a girl, you can hardly pick them up on the handle. And then all of a sudden, that got into play and sort of flew past my shoulder again, and it just went on from there and holding down, and I basically got that from her in the end, and took that and basically hit her with it. It was, I think, bang, 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 fall over, and oh my god, what just happened?
What state's she in after having hit her 3 times?
That was it.
What do you mean that's it?
That was it. Quiet, and there was nothing. There was no movement in any shape or form. It was quiet with blood everywhere.
Peter said that the following morning he bought a freezer, he put the freezer in the shed, and then he put Milani's body inside of it. He decided that he was going to hide her. He then cleaned up the whole house, and days after her death he got in touch with Milani's family, her parents in South Africa, and he lied to them. He told them that Milani had died suddenly of a brain aneurysm. According to sources, Milani's mother Jayanne travelled from South Africa to Surrey in England after hearing the news, probably to be there for Peter to support him after his wife's death. And apparently while she was there, Peter persuaded her not to go and see her daughter's body in the morgue. He said that she shouldn't see her child's body in that way, and so Jayanne didn't. She listened to him. Little did she know at the time, of course, that Milani's body wasn't even in the morgue. It was in Peter's shed in a freezer. And what is absolutely insane, this is honestly one of the craziest things I've ever heard in a true crime case, and that's that Peter even went to the extreme of making fake ashes to give to Milani's family. He literally burned a load of wood and things on a barbecue until they resembled ashes. He put them in an urn, and then he got on a plane to South Africa with this urn. And whilst there, he attended a memorial service which Milani's family had organised for her. Apparently he put his wedding ring into the urn with Milani's ashes, and he told people that he, quote, didn't believe in heaven, but he had heaven on earth with Milani. The lengths that this man went to cover up this crime is absolutely wild. I've never ever heard of anything like it. I've never heard of a murderer making fake ashes to try and trick their victims' loved ones. It's so awful and sick. You can't imagine the trauma that Milani's family must have gone through to be told firstly in September of 2006 that Milani had just died suddenly because of a brain aneurysm, having to deal with the grief of losing her so unexpectedly, having to come to terms with that, and then 3 years later being informed by the police that that was all a lie. She hadn't died of a brain aneurysm. She had been murdered by the man who was supposed to love her and care for her and protect her. I cannot comprehend how much pain that must have caused her loved ones when they found out that everything they had been told about their daughter's death was just one big twisted lie. It's insane. But that was Peter's version of events. That is what he said happened. He admitted that he killed Milani, but he basically said that he had to. It was self-defense. If he didn't kill her, then she probably would have killed him. But as I'm sure you've probably guessed, the detectives did not believe him. They did not believe that this was self-defense. They believed that he killed Milani in cold blood. And the reason they think this is because the evidence they did have seemed to indicate that Milani was killed while she was sleeping. The main piece of evidence that seemed to indicate this was the eye mask. If you recall from earlier on in the video, when Milani's body was found in the wheelie bin, there was an eye mask over her eyes. Now, it was clear that the eye mask had been on Milani's face probably since she died because of the state of it. It was absolutely covered in decomposition material from where it had been, I guess, attached to Milani's body as she decomposed over time. So it was very, very dirty, but it was also broken and damaged. It was damaged where her left eye would have been. And if you remember from Milani's post-mortem, Milani had a deep puncture wound on her left cheek, just under her left eye, where the pathologist believed she had been hit over the head with a heavy object, causing her to die. So the evidence from her post-mortem lined up with the eye mask. The damage on the eye mask suggested that she had been wearing it when she was murdered. And when do people wear eye masks? When they're sleeping. So that's why the police believed that she had been asleep when Peter hit her over the head. This evidence proved that his story was a lie, and so they confronted him with this piece of evidence, and this is what he had to say.
Now, we found this eye mask, and they're right across her eyes, as they would be if she was using them to fall asleep. So how do you explain that?
Can I have a word with him quickly?
Yeah. Yes, now, I would suggest to you, Peter, that if she's fighting with you, she can't really be doing much fighting if she's got an eye mask on her, over her eyes. So how did she end up in the sleeping bag with the eye mask? Why didn't you tell us about the eye mask?
Because I can't remember putting it on her or anything like that.
You can't remember? So, at what point was the eye mask on her then?
I can't remember. I wasn't even aware that it was on her body.
Is the truth of the matter that when you killed her, she was asleep?
No. No.
You sure about that, Peter?
Hey?
You sure?
Yeah.
As you just saw from those clips, Peter completely denied having killed Milani while she was asleep, and the police noticed that after they confronted him with this evidence, Peter's whole attitude and demeanour just started to change. Before, he was quite calm and collected in his interview, quite disturbingly calm actually, whilst he was describing how his wife had died. But then after he was confronted with the eye mask evidence, it was like he started to panic. He started being quite snappy with the detectives and passive aggressive, probably because he realised that he had been caught out and he was struggling to come up with an explanation for the eye mask. And obviously because he was still denying that it was murder, the police still didn't know for definite what his motive was. I mean, as I said earlier on, Milani's diary entries seem to suggest that maybe he killed her because she confronted him about his cheating. Maybe he felt that she was getting in the way of him flirting and sleeping with other women, and so he decided to get rid of her. And the police soon found more evidence to support this theory, actually. You see, after Peter was brought back to the UK from Malta to be arrested and interviewed by detectives, another team of detectives headed out to Malta, where he had obviously been living recently, where all of his belongings were. They travelled there to search his home. They wanted to see if they could find anything amongst his belongings which could further link him to the crime. And what they found was that he had a big box of, I think, like maybe bank statements and records and things. He was very organised in that sense, and he actually kept his phone records in this box, if you can believe that. So the police had a look through his phone records, and they found that in the lead up to Milani's death, Peter had been calling and texting the woman from his work that he had had an affair with. So he was cheating again. According to a few articles, the woman that he was cheating on Milani with was called Emma, and apparently she didn't know that Peter and Milani were still together. Peter had lied to her and said that they'd split up when they hadn't. So yeah, he was dating Emma in the lead up to Milani's death, and he continued seeing her afterwards too. In fact, the police discovered that the day after Milani was killed, so the 28th of August 2006, which was actually Peter Wallner's birthday, they discovered that that day, that evening, he had taken his girlfriend Emma out for some dinner. They had some nice food and champagne, and then that evening Emma went back to Peter's house with him on Hamilton Avenue in Cobham, and that night they slept together in Peter's bed. The bed that he shared with his wife Milani, the bed that Milani had been brutally murdered on just the day before this. He denied the allegations that he cheated on Milani and was having an affair with Emma. Of course he did. He wasn't being truthful about anything else, so why would he tell the truth about this? But once again, the evidence proved that he was lying, and ultimately, after the collection of all of the evidence, the police felt that they had enough to charge him and take him to trial, and so that's exactly what they did. Peter Wallner's trial began, I believe, in May of 2010, less than a year after Milani's body was found. As expected, he pleaded not guilty to murder, but guilty to manslaughter and also guilty to preventing the lawful burial of a body. So he was still sticking to his self-defense story. But during the trial, the prosecution outlined their version of events, what they believed really happened based on the evidence that the police had collected. And they essentially believed that this crime was premeditated. They believed that Peter had planned the murder of his wife because he wanted to sleep with other women. He wanted to carry on his affair with his co-worker Emma, and he felt that Milani was getting in the way of that. During the trial, the prosecution described the murder as being, quote, a senseless killing motivated by the greed of this man to make way for a different woman in his life. So they believed that on the evening of the 27th of August 2006, Melanie Wallner was asleep in bed after probably having a really nice evening with family, having a nice Chinese meal with loved ones. She was in bed, asleep, with the eye mask over her eyes, and it's believed that Peter saw this as his opportunity to strike. He could attack Milani while she was sleeping so that she wouldn't have a chance to fight back and defend herself, because she wouldn't have known that it was about to happen. So he went to the kitchen, grabbed a cast iron griddle pan, and he hit Milani in the head with it just below her left eye, and she died. Once she was dead, he decided that he was going to hide his wife's body, so he ordered a freezer, put her body in there in the shed, and there she remained for nearly 3 years. It's insane, really, that he was able to get away with it for so long. He told everyone the fake story about how Milani had died of a brain aneurysm. He made the fake ashes to give to her parents. He attended a memorial service that they had for Milani where he pretended to be really upset and distressed about her sudden passing. And then I believe around the end of May, early June of 2009, Peter Wallner was moving out of the house on Hamilton Avenue, and he was leaving the country, I think with a new girlfriend, not Emma, the co-worker. They had split up by this point. So he encountered a problem here. He had to figure out what to do with Milani's body now. He, of course, couldn't leave her in the freezer in the shed because other tenants would be moving in soon and they would find her and he would be caught. So instead, he put her body in the rubbish bin. He wrapped her body up in plastic bags and a sleeping bag. Although, having said that, I'm not sure if he did that back in 2006 when she was killed before putting her body in the freezer, or if he did that in 2009 when he decided to move her. But at some point, he put her body in a sleeping bag, and then in 2009, he moved her body to the wheelie bin and tried to cover her up and conceal her with a load of other rubbish bags. He clearly hoped that she would just be taken to the rubbish tip and never be found. And then he packed his things and left. He sold the freezer, he left the country and went to Malta with his new girlfriend. But of course he wasn't there for long. Just weeks later, after Milani's body was found, the detectives pieced this case together and Peter was brought back to the UK, where he was arrested and charged and of course eventually went to trial. Now his defence team obviously tried to refute the prosecution's account of what happened. They stuck to Peter's story that he had to kill Milani in order to save himself because she attacked him first. She came at him with the rolling pin and the griddle pan first, and she stabbed him 3 times in the leg with a knife, and he did actually have 3 scars on his leg from where he had been stabbed. However, experts were able to tell that these injuries were self-inflicted. He had stabbed himself in the leg with a knife to try and make his story seem real, and thankfully the jury saw through it. They did not believe his self-defense story, and at the end of the trial they found 34-year-old Peter Wallner guilty of the murder of his wife, 30-year-old Milani. He was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum of 20 years, and of course prison is where Peter Wallner remains to this day. And that is it for this case. That concludes the case of Melanie Wallner. An awful case. Milani deserves so much better than this, and it breaks my heart that she was so determined to make her marriage work. Despite the fact that Peter had cheated, she still loved him and she wanted to fix their relationship. She gave him another chance and he repaid her in the most vile way. He took her life from her while she was sleeping in her own bed, a place where she is supposed to feel safe. And like I mentioned earlier, it baffles me that he was able to get away with it for so long. I cannot believe that she was in the freezer for years and no one found her in that time. He must have been so careful not to let anyone go in that shed in the garden. But yeah, that is it for this case. As always, please do let me know your thoughts and opinions on the case in the comments. I would love to hear what you guys think. Also feel free to let me know of any other cases that you would like to see me cover on this channel. I think this is going to be the last video that I post before Christmas, so I hope you all have a wonderful Christmas if you celebrate it. And yeah, I will see you all again next week after Christmas for another mystery with Molly. Bye!